I saw my wife arrive with her lover together at the company party. I had no reaction. That scene destroyed me. So I went to them and said to her, "You just destroyed our family, I'm going to divorce you right now." She was desperate, as she knew she would not have custody of our children. The sentence came out of my mouth with the taste of blood. Not because I wanted to fight, not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because I was hurt in a way that words could never describe. I looked at that woman, the same one who shared 17 Christmases with me, who watched me build a home from scratch, the same one with whom I imagined growing old. And there she was, with another man at her side, with that guilty look trying to simulate surprise, as if she didn't know that her theater had come to an end. Her gaze asked for help, but it was already too late. What hurt me most was the way he held her, his hand resting on her waist with a naturalness that only someone who is used to touching can have. It was an intimate, almost arrogant gesture. They didn't seem to hide it. And perhaps that was the worst detail. It wasn't the hidden kiss, the cheap hotel, the men's perfume on her clothes. No. It was the fact that, even before my eyes, they had no shame. When she saw me walking up to the two of them, her eyes filled with panic. He, on the other hand, maintained a practiced smile. As if he thought he was just another coworker approaching. He didn't know who I was. But she knew. And every step I took stripped her of another layer of dignity. I said the phrase. The phrase that no one wants to say. The phrase no one wants to hear. The phrase that changes everything. And when I finished, everything around me seemed to go silent. The noise of the party music, the laughter of colleagues, the toasts. Nothing made sense anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But inside, I was an earthquake ready to devastate everything. The lover took a step back, as if he finally realized who I was. And her. She began to plead. Not for me. But for the children. Perhaps the worst type of betrayal is not the act itself, but the naturalness with which it takes place. As if cheating were an inevitable consequence of routine, boredom, lack of novelty. As if the error was justified. As if it were, just once. Just once the dinner, just once the most intimate conversation, just once the touching of the hand, just once the hotel room, just once the lie. And then, when you least expect it, the person sleeping next to you has already built a parallel life while you believed everything was going well. For months, I was blind. And the worst thing is that I wasn't blinded by innocence. I was blind by choice. Because there are signs. There always is. But love, when it is true, creates a kind of filter. You don't want to see. You prefer to believe that her tiredness is from work, that long baths are just relaxation, that the lack of desire is due to stress. You even convince yourself that maybe the problem is you. Which may have stopped being interesting. That maybe he's really getting old. And the guilt creeps in, like a poison that you yourself helped to spread. Meanwhile, she rehearses smiles in the mirror, sends messages in secret, and creates justifications for not being there. Until the day comes when she appears arm in arm with another man, in front of everyone, without even warning that it would be the end. The pain is physical. You feel it in your stomach. As if something was tearing inside. As if your life was being ripped away by invisible hooks. And the worst, she cries. But not out of regret. She cries because she realizes she has lost control of the narrative. Because she knows that divorce is right, that child custody will be a cruel judgment, and that her image as a devoted mother is beginning to crumble. The children. It's always about them in the end. She knew that losing them would be more devastating than losing the husband she cheated on. I left the party without looking back. She came running. Crying. Holding me by the arm. Please don't do this, think about the children, she begged. And for the first time in many years, I was able to look into her eyes and not feel love. Just pity. I loved her so much that I forgave her for small daily betrayals, the coldness, the absence, the silences. But this one? There was no way to ignore this. That woman I slept with for years was no more. She had died the moment she decided to share a bed with me and another man at the same time. Without warning me, without giving me a choice. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a sentence. The next few days were a blur. Lawyers, painful conversations with children, agreements, fake tears. She tried to convince me that the case was recent. He tried to tell me that he loved me. He tried to make me remember the good times. But her every word only dug deeper into the hole where our story was buried. Until the day of the hearing arrived. And in that courtroom, in front of the judge, her lawyer, my children watching from afar, I saw something I will never forget. I saw the desperation of those who thought they had everything under control and lost everything at once. The judge read the opinion. She would lose custody. Financial stability. The image of a good mother. And at that moment, she actually cried. Not for betrayal. But because of its consequences. You think you know someone. You think you've built a home. But everything you've done, everything you've given, everything you've sacrificed, can be erased with a cell phone ring and an exchange of glances in an office hallway. There is no betrayal that starts suddenly. It is being built with small concessions, with rehearsed excuses, with hidden desires. And when you wake up, you're next to someone who doesn't love you anymore, but pretends to. For convenience. For comfort. Or out of fear of loneliness. And you? You are there. Pretending to. Because you're afraid to face the truth. But what she didn't know was that I didn't just face the truth. I hugged her. And I made it my strength. The divorce was just the beginning. I rebuilt my life with the bloody hands of my own disappointment. And destiny, that silent writer, tried to do justice with irony. Because when she thought she was starting over with her lover, the truth knocked hard on the door. And what happened in that courtroom was just the beginning of the fall. Karma doesn't add up. He whispers, waits, and when the victim feels safe, he attacks. I reinvented myself. I became someone better. I allowed myself to meet new people. And what started as pain became strength. What seemed like the end was the push I needed to be reborn. Today, when I look back, I see that moment at the party as a turning point. That's where the farce ended. That's where I died, and was reborn. But what few know, and what she would never have imagined, is that, weeks after the hearing, a revelation changed the course of everything. Something she caused herself. Something that turned his attempt at revenge into a spectacle of public humiliation. A detail, a forgotten piece in this puzzle. A mistake she made and it cost her dearly. And that's where the real turnaround begins. Because the worst punishment was not divorce. Nor the loss of children. That's what happened next. Something that not even the most ingenious screenwriters would have predicted. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize betrayal. Never. All the stories you will hear are fictional, but the feelings, those are real. Our objective is clear, to show how betrayal corrodes lives, destroys families, and leaves marks that time cannot erase. Get ready. You're about to hear a story shocking, intense, and unforgettable. Good story. Lucas and Emma have always been the type of couple who seemed born for each other. They had similar tastes, laughed at the same jokes, built everything together, brick by brick, since the days when he still drove an old car to job interviews and she shared a small apartment with 2 colleagues. When they met, they were both hungry for a stable, mature and fulfilling life. Lucas, with his methodical and protective personality, always had his feet firmly on the ground. He was the kind of man who believed that anything could be achieved with discipline, loyalty, and constant effort. Emma, on the other hand, was made of a shine that attracted attention without making an effort. Intelligent, articulate, subtly vain, she had an engaging presence, but at the same time balanced, which did not allow charm to be confused with frivolity. Together, they formed a seemingly unbeatable duo. While he was in charge of building the foundation, she filled the house with life. They had been married for 11 years. They had 2 young children, Sophia, aged 7, and Lucas Jr., aged 5. Their routine was the same one that seems simple, but only those who live it know how demanding it is. Waking up early, preparing coffee while the children are still sleepy, organizing their backpacks, racing against the clock, dropping everyone off at school, facing traffic, work, meetings, and at the end of the day, gathering the family at the table for dinner. On the weekends, sometimes a park, sometimes visiting the grandparents, sometimes just the 4 of them on the couch watching animated films. Lucas was proud of all of this. More than the role of senior coordinator at a multinational technology company, it was his home life that he saw as his greatest achievement. When I watched my children playing in the garden of their newly financed house, I felt a peace that was difficult to describe. He loved Emma with a silent and consistent intensity, like someone who loves for the base, for the foundation, for everything that is built with time and commitment. He never doubted what he felt for her. He never allowed himself to question how she felt about him. Emma, in turn, was seen by everyone as the perfect wife. He worked in the marketing sector of the same company as Lucas, although in another division. She was constantly praised for her discreet posture, her natural elegance and the way she managed everything with balance, her work, her children, her home, her husband. For her colleagues, she was an example. For mothers at school, a model of organization and affection. When he was late picking up his children, he would gently let them know and always rewarded them with ice cream or a different outing. His way of speaking to Lucas in public was always respectful, attentive, almost romantic. The two seemed to maintain an unbreakable pact between them, a tacit agreement of loyalty and partnership. At the office, Lucas was very popular. Meeting deadlines, fair with subordinates, a leader who listened more than he spoke. He was recognized for his results, but also for the human way in which he treated people. It wasn't one for parties, nor noisy get-togethers. I preferred the silence of nights at home to the noise of business cocktails. Emma, on the other hand, had a certain natural ability for this type of event. He knew how to move around, smile accurately, maintain light conversations, measure the tone between friendliness and professional detachment. It never seemed to force anything. Everything about her was subtly engaging. And perhaps that's why it was always one of the first to be remembered on the company's event lists. Lucas liked that. I felt proud. I thought the way she carried herself was beautiful. He never, at any time, felt threatened. After all, Emma was his. Their marriage, for those who saw it from the outside, was the picture of success. They had financial stability, healthy children, a comfortable home, travel plans for the end of the year, and a balanced routine. From time to time, there would be friction, as in any marriage, usually over child-rearing, household chores, budgeting priorities. But everything was resolved through dialogue. Lucas was rational. Emma, conciliator. There was never shouting, slamming doors, or insults. They treated each other with the care of those who understand that love is more than just a feeling, it is also a decision, a choice, and maintenance. They had their moments of intimacy preserved, even when time was scarce. Emma liked to decorate the house with candles and discreet scents, prepare wine at night when the children were already asleep, and Lucas loved the way she placed her feet over his on the sofa, in an almost childish gesture of affection. The company where they both worked had undergone restructuring in recent months. Many positions were changed, departments merged, leaders replaced. The environment was more competitive, demands increased, and invitations to corporate events intensified. Happy hours, conferences, product launches. It was a new phase, more demanding, but also full of possibilities. Lucas started coming home later. Emma too. They both said it was a passenger. And they both believed it. But time, this detail that seemed small, began to infiltrate between them. The time that was previously shared was being swallowed up by the demands of the company. And yet, they insisted on keeping everything running. Lucas started preparing breakfast alone more often. Emma slept before him some nights. The children, perceptive like all children, asked why the two were always so tired. Still, the relationship endured. Because their love, at least until then, seemed strong enough to withstand these shocks. On birthdays, they exchanged handwritten letters, with sincere, touching words, sometimes even with tears. On the weekends, they tried to make up for lost time with simple walks, moments of family laughter, film sessions. It was as if, even though it had lost some of its previous shine, there was still a solid foundation there. A desire to continue. Emma had had the same perfume since the beginning of her marriage. And it was this smell that Lucas looked for on the pillow when she left before him or when she slept later. He was not an insecure man. He never snooped on her cell phone, never suspected messages, never wanted to know more than what she said. I trusted. It was that simple. I trusted with the kind of trust that is built slowly, with years of partnership, with daily proof of affection, with silent certainties that only time brings. And Emma, even on the most exhausting days, never stopped being kind. He had sweet words. Spontaneous affection. Complicit looks. They still laughed together. They still admired each other. They still shared the same blanket on cold nights. The most impressive thing was how everyone around them saw them as an example. Married friends often said they hoped to have a relationship like theirs. Moms at school asked how Emma managed to manage everything without ever looking exhausted. Lucas's colleagues commented on how lucky he was. And he believed it. He felt like a lucky man. He believed that he had won in life not because of what he had in the bank, but because of the family he built. And he never imagined, not for a moment, that all this security could be an illusion. An illusion carefully maintained, day after day, smile after smile, by someone he believed knew better than himself. The company party had been scheduled for weeks. It would be an elegant, celebratory event, with all departments invited, in a sophisticated hall, complete with a live orchestra and speeches from the board of directors. Lucas hesitated about going. He was tired, he just wanted to rest with his children at home, but Emma insisted that he go. He said it had been a while since they went out, that it would be good, that everyone would be there. And he, for her sake, accepted. He sent his suit to the cleaners, bought a new pair of shoes, cut his hair. I wanted to measure up to her. Not because of his appearance, but because he still cared. And Emma, that night, looked especially radiant. She chose a new dress, put on more makeup than usual, and had a sparkle in her eyes that Lucas hadn't seen in a while. He smiled when he saw her ready. Said she looked beautiful. She smiled back. Thank you. But there was something in that look that he didn't understand. They entered the hall hand in hand. They greeted colleagues, exchanged smiles, heard compliments. Everything seemed in place. The scenery, the music, the lights. It was another perfect night for a perfect couple. At least, that's what everyone saw. And that's what Lucas believed, until that moment. Ambient music filled the room with a touch of almost cinematic elegance. Soft lights drew discreet shadows on walls decorated with noble flowers, while waiters glided among guests with trays of sparkling wine and refined starters. Lucas observed everything with that analytical look that he always had at events like this, measuring every detail, absorbing the environment without giving himself over completely to it. Emma seemed more at ease, smiled naturally, greeted colleagues from other sectors with familiarity, as if she was floating with grace in that universe tailor-made for her. The harmony between the two was still noticed by those who saw them from afar, their hands touched discreetly, their smiles exchanged were still spontaneous. But there was something, a subtle and almost imperceptible vibration, that began to misalign the atmosphere between them. At the beginning of the night, Lucas stayed close to her, talking to colleagues he only knew by sight and trying to connect with conversations that seemed repetitive to him. Emma, on the other hand, walked away naturally, saying she needed to speak to someone from marketing, then the events team, and finally an HR coordinator who had helped organize the night. Lucas wasn't bothered at first. He understood her social role there, her ability to circulate, represent, keep connections alive. He drank another glass of wine, loosened his tie a little and allowed himself to watch, silently, as she walked through the room, graceful as always. It was nice to see his wife being admired. It was comforting to realize that she still attracted glances and attention, even after so many years together. Lucas trusted. Always trusted. He wasn't jealous. He was never the controlling type. His security came from the certainty that Emma would return to him at the end of the night, as always. But then something started to change. It was a small, almost irrelevant detail. A look that lasted a second too long. A muffled laugh followed by a light touch on the arm of a man Lucas didn't know. Too relaxed posture. The exchange of glances between Emma and this man during another couple's dance. Lucas felt his stomach turn, but he was still looking for logical reasons. Maybe it was just a new colleague, someone nice, a casual conversation. He tried to convince himself of this as he took slow steps towards the bar. He ordered a whiskey, ignoring the slight tremor he felt in his fingers. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to intuition. The one that comes creeping in, without making a fuss, but settles like an uncomfortable whisper in the back of the mind. He downed the glass at once, feeling the liquid burn in his throat, as if that could calm the growing turmoil inside him. Emma returned to him minutes later, smiling as if nothing had happened, tucking her hair behind her ear, asking if he was having fun. Lucas responded with a restrained nod, carefully observing her every gesture, searching for any crack in her eyes, any trace of tension, anything that betrayed what he still refused to name. She looked the same, and yet, there was a mismatch. Like an off-key song that only he could hear. The man from before walked by. Emma looked away. And there, in that fleeting detour, Lucas felt the first sting of certainty go through his chest. The night advanced. Toasts were made. Speeches were given. Laughter echoed. And Lucas, increasingly introspective, observed the small gestures, the details that previously went unnoticed. Emma avoided prolonged contact with him. His touch was more distant. Their smiles seemed automatic. When he tried to hold her hand more firmly, she gently pulled away, claiming she needed to touch up her makeup. Time passed and she didn't come back. So he looked for her with his eyes, walked slowly towards the most empty corridors of the hall, and it was there, in the shadows between the bathroom and an area reserved for the event organizers, that he saw her. The image froze time. Emma was with the same man. They laughed quietly. She was holding her cell phone and showing him something. The man lightly touched his shoulder. And when he said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek, it took a second longer than necessary, too close to the mouth. Lucas backed away. He returned to the hall as if he had been struck. He sat in a corner, away from the lights and the eyes. I needed to think. I needed to understand. I needed to breathe. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I was still looking for rational arguments. But something inside him had already broken. The silence of the next moment was deafening. I no longer heard music, voices, or laughter. What came to mind was the succession of scenes from the last few months. The comings and goings, the delays, the silences, the different smiles, the new clothes, the perfume changed 2 weeks ago, the long showers, the cell phone screen turned down. Everything he previously saw as banal routines now seemed part of a more sordid plan. The heart was racing. The throat closed. The ground seemed to tilt beneath his feet. But still, he needed more. I needed to see it. I needed to be sure. And certainty came faster than he expected. Shortly after midnight, guests began to leave the room. He was looking for Emma, who had said she would get the coats. It took a while. Then he went out to the lobby. And that's where it happened. There, in front of everyone, with the eyes of colleagues and superiors as witnesses. Emma walked through the double doors, with the same man at her side, laughing openly, as if they had just left an intimate moment. And in that instant, Lucas knew. Not by words, not by confession. I knew it from the way she looked at the other man, from the lightness in her walk, from the touch on her arm, from the way the two seemed to belong together. The betrayal was not blatant, but it was implicit in every gesture. It was a body that no longer lied. A look that he no longer needed to hide. Lucas walked towards them as if going through his own life in slow motion. The gaze fixed on her. The other man, confused, still didn't understand. But she understood. The exact second Lucas's eyes met hers, Emma froze. The smile disappeared. Her body stiffened like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare. Lucas stopped a few steps away. He took a deep breath. His voice was firm, serious, and cut the air like a cold blade. He said few words. Words that broke the silence of the night like shattered glass. I told her it all ended there. That she had destroyed a family. That there was no turning back. And as he spoke, the hall that was once full of sounds and conversations now seemed to breathe in pause. People watched. Shame ran from her face like fresh paint. And the lover, now identified, retreated without knowing what to do. She tried to say something. He tried to grab Lucas' arm. He tried to justify it. But nothing came out. The throat blocked, the despair in the eyes. I knew I would lose everything. The ground she walked on, the children she loved, the husband who one day offered her the world. The certainty of stability evaporated in front of everyone. And it was there, in that final moment of the chapter, that betrayal stopped being a whisper and became a scream. But there was something more. Something she kept. Something that had not yet been said. An unrevealed secret. A detail that would change everything. A fragment of history still hidden, ready to explode when you least expected it. And the only thing that stopped Lucas from turning his back for good was the feeling that this wasn't the end yet. It was just the beginning of the real impact. She stood in the lobby for a few seconds, still holding her coat and bag as if she were trapped in time, as if something inside her had silently snapped and she no longer knew where to run. Lucas had left without looking back, leaving no room for explanations, not allowing her to even follow him. His words echoed like a final judgment, and she knew, instantly, that the life she knew had been ripped away from her in front of everyone, like a curtain pulled back abruptly at the end of a show she herself had created. Emma left the party without speaking to anyone, her face hot with embarrassment and her heart collapsing with each step. When he arrived home, he found only silence. The couple's room was the same, but now his absence made everything seem smaller. His shoes were no longer in the corner, the familiar scent was no longer in the air. In the closet, the clothes were gone. She threw herself on the floor and cried like a child. The next day, Lucas didn't show up. Didn't even call. He didn't even write. No words. Emma called non-stop and received only the cold call direct to voicemail. He sent messages, long, desperate, then short and dry, until he started begging in short sentences, cut off by panic, please. Just listen to me. I need to tell you. But his silence was crueler than any answer. He didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to understand. He had already condemned it. And no matter how much she tried to justify it, what had happened that night was unforgivable. But what Lucas still didn't know, and what Emma needed to tell him, was what really motivated that despair in her eyes. It wasn't just guilt. It wasn't just regret. There was something hidden. Something that hadn't been said. Something that changed everything. 3 days later, she appeared at the door of his parents' house with her eyes sunken and her body lighter, as if the weight of all the sleepless nights had been replaced by the tiredness of what still needed to be revealed. He opened the door emotionlessly. He just stood there, standing still, with a hard look in his eyes. Emma took a deep breath and said she couldn't take it anymore. That needed to be heard. That what he saw wasn't the end of the story. Lucas didn't respond. He just moved away from the door, allowing her to enter. He sat on the sofa, motionless, as if he were in front of a witness who needed to testify with precision. She sat forward, hands shaking, trying to get started. He said that nothing he imagined was simple. That it had become bigger than her. That the betrayal, as painful as it was, wasn't the real earthquake. And then she said. He released it like someone tearing a veil with their own hands. Emma said that the man he saw her with, the man she had been involved with, was the company's new finance director, someone who had recently transferred from another branch. His name was Adam. And he wasn't just a colleague. Lucas frowned, still waiting for the center point. Emma continued. She said that, weeks before the event, she had been called to a confidential meeting with the company's management and with Adam himself. At that meeting, she was informed that Lucas would be fired. The new management was downsizing departments and considered that he had already reached his professional ceiling there. Emma was in shock. He tried to argue. He said he was essential. But she was informed that the decision had already been made. Lucas would be discreetly fired after the end-of-year party, with a letter of recommendation and a symbolic bonus. And that the company wanted to avoid scandals or legal problems. And it was there, at that moment, that everything started to fall apart. She was contacted by Adam days later. He suggested that if she agreed to collaborate on the company's transition plan and help ensure Lucas left smoothly, she could be promoted to senior marketing coordinator. He said his actions and discretion would be appreciated. Emma refused. He said it was immoral. But over the next few days, Adam insisted. He began to approach her more frequently, with compliments, promises, and veiled blackmail. Until one night, after a meeting, he left her at home and tried to kiss her. She backed away. She said she was married. That he had no interest. But he smiled and said that she would have to choose, either she would become an ally, or she would be just another expendable name on the company's list. Emma found herself trapped. I was afraid that if I told Lucas the truth, he would confront the board and leave the company tainted. I was afraid of losing everything. Fear of seeing her husband humiliated, her children helpless. And in a moment of weakness, at a later dinner, he relented. Not out of desire. Not for love. But out of fear. And that night, the mistake was made. She didn't recognize herself, but she had crossed the line. I couldn't get out of that network anymore. Every day, Adam became more invasive, more present. And she tried to move away, but she knew that everything she said or did could be used against her and Lucas. The affair was not lasting. It wasn't constant. It was a fall. A silent wreck. And she, cornered, started trying to compensate for her guilt with gestures of affection, with dinners at home, with touches that were no longer spontaneous. I was trying to rescue a bond that was already contaminated inside. Lucas interrupted her with a fierce look. He asked her if she thought that lessened the betrayal. He asked if the fact that he had given in out of fear justified his choice. Emma cried. He said he didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she knew he wouldn't come back. But I needed him to know that it wasn't out of lack of love. Who never stopped loving him. That he couldn't bear to see his career destroyed. And then, in a final gesture, she opened her bag and handed him a folder with documents. It was a copy of the minutes of the board meeting with Lucas's dismissal plan. With signatures. With dates. With emails. It was proof of what had been planned. It was proof that he was no longer wanted in the company long before the betrayal happened. It was also the revelation that Adam had used his position to manipulate them both, like pawns in a power game. Lucas took the papers with cold hands. You read the first few lines. Then the signatures. Then the email header. He felt his body go cold. What Emma was saying was true. He would be fired. It would be discarded. And she tried to avoid it. He tried to keep everything intact. But he chose the darkest path. As he looked at her, he saw only the shadow of the woman he once knew. Not out of hate. But out of pity. For pain. He asked, in a low voice, what she expected of him now. Emma replied that she didn't expect anything. Who just wanted him to know the truth. That at least part of the story would be rescued from the mud. And he concluded by saying that Adam continued in his position. Which was still respected. That no one knew what he had done. And that she, now, was alone with all of that. Lucas stood up in silence. He kept the papers. He just said that he knew everything now. And before leaving, he looked into her eyes and murmured that, despite everything, she was still the mother of his children. And for that reason, I wouldn't destroy it. But from that moment on, he would no longer protect her either. He left the house without looking back, but this time, not with the weight of a betrayed man, but with the knowledge that he had escaped something much bigger than he thought. The betrayal was just the surface. What lay beneath was far more rotten than anyone suspected. And there, at that moment, a new mission was born. One he didn't plan on abandoning. Because the game wasn't over yet. And Adam still didn't know who he was dealing with. Lucas left that house with heavy steps, but there was no longer any hesitation in them. The pain that had once crushed him was now transformed into something more solid, something that gave him structure. The air felt colder outside, but inside everything burned. Emma's words still echoed like a muffled drum, pulsing against his will, trying to make him understand, accept, forgive, but he was no longer stuck with that idea. Now, with the documents in hand, with the truth out in the open, something deeper had been ignited. It was no longer about marital betrayal, it was no longer about bed or desire, it was about how much they had tried to diminish him, erase him, make him a disposable number, a replaceable part. And Emma, despite claiming good intentions, allowed herself to be used in this process. It didn't matter if it was out of fear, out of insecurity, out of protection. She made a choice. And now he would do his too. That same night, Lucas got in the car and went straight to the office of Fred, his lawyer and longtime friend. It was after 10 at night, but he didn't hesitate to call. The voice on the other end of the line couldn't hide its surprise, but agreed to welcome him. Within 30 minutes, they were sitting opposite each other, in a small, no-frills room, with the smell of cold coffee and old wood. Lucas threw the documents on the table and asked Fred to read everything carefully. The lawyer turned page by page, his expression becoming increasingly tense, until he closed the folder and asked, almost in disbelief, if it was all real. Lucas confirmed with a slow nod and said that not only did he want to protect himself in the divorce, but he wanted to take that entire board to justice. He said he would not allow another employee to go through what he went through. Fred looked him in the eye and replied that if he was willing to move forward, there were ways. But it would be a war. Long, silent. Dangerous. Lucas just replied that he had nothing left to lose. In the days that followed, Emma's world fell apart in silence. After the conversation with Lucas, he was unable to work anymore. He asked for medical leave, citing psychological distress, and locked himself at home with his children, trying to protect them from the collapse he was experiencing inside. Every piece of news, every email, every little movement of the company made her tense, as if she expected everything to explode at any moment. Adam, on the other hand, maintained his poise. In the corporate environment, he remained firm, smiling, manipulative. He had allies. It had a history. He knew how to hide tracks. He knew how to press without leaving a trace. But what he didn't know was that Lucas had begun to chart a path much deeper than any superficial denunciation. He gathered evidence, searched files, asked silent help from old colleagues, built a dossier. With each conversation, each print, each testimony obtained with effort, a web was forming that could not be ignored for much longer. It was on a gray afternoon, almost without warning, that Emma received an official notification: Lucas' legal case against the company's management was formally opened. And her name, although not listed as a defendant, appeared mentioned in sections of the complaint, which indicated that she had prior knowledge of the abuses of power and remained silent. Emma collapsed. He sent a message to Lucas asking to talk. He refused. He said he had nothing else to resolve with her. That he would now deal with justice. The rejection was a brutal blow. More brutal than divorce. Because now she was not only the traitor, she was also an accomplice. And even though she hadn't planned anything, even though she had felt coerced, she now understood that her silence was part of the problem. He looked for his lawyer. He tried to anticipate. But nothing she did would change what was essential: she was at the center of a bomb that she herself helped to set. Meanwhile, Lucas's life took a different direction. He started going to a discreet co-working space in the city center where he started designing a new project with an old friend from the technology sector. A corporate crisis management application, focused precisely on helping employees deal with situations of abuse, harassment and persecution within companies. The irony was not lost on him: his greatest pain now became his new mission. It was as if all that destruction had, in some distorted and cruel way, given birth to something new, more useful, more transformative. Lucas slowly smiled again. He began to meet colleagues, old friends, and got back in touch with his sister who had lived abroad for years. And it was on one of these trips to the co-working space that he met Helena, a lawyer who shared the same room and who, little by little, became part of his routine. First in conversations about business law, then over quick lunches, until they became lighter confidences and unexpected laughs. Helena didn't ask about the past. I just listened to him. And that was enough. At the hearing of the case against the company, the atmosphere was one of absolute tension. The board hired one of the most expensive offices in the city. They tried to reach an agreement. Lucas refused. He said he wanted justice. He said he wanted every name to be exposed. Emma was present, sitting at the back of the room, with her eyes downcast. He didn't testify. But he cried when her name was mentioned, and when the judge asked Lucas if he believed she had acted out of malice. There was a long silence. He simply responded that he believed that, at some point, she chose to remain silent. And that silence was costly. And there, in that response, there was no more anger. There was a farewell. After the hearing, Emma tried to approach him once again. He said he didn't sleep. That he had nightmares. That he no longer knew who he was. Lucas listened. He looked at her with a serene, but distant look. He said the love he felt for her was real. That the life they built was valuable. But her time in his story was over. Emma tried to smile, but burst into tears. She said she still loved him. That I knew it was late. But I needed to say it. And Lucas, for the first time ever, touched her hand lightly. He said he forgave. But I wouldn't go back. A few weeks later, the judge ruled Lucas won the case. The company was condemned for unethical conduct, internal manipulation and coercion of employees. The board was removed. Adam was fired amidst scandal and investigated for harassment in other cases that came to light after the lawsuit. The victory made headlines. Lucas's name began to circulate as a reference to courage and integrity. But he didn't let that get him drunk. He continued his work on the app, maintained his routine with his children, cultivated his new relationship with Helena without rushing, with lightness. Emma, in turn, stepped away from the market for an indefinite period of time. He moved to a smaller apartment. The children started to live with Lucas, but she saw them regularly. She was trying to rebuild a new version of herself. Alone. And for the first time, he understood the price of each choice. Life went on. Not like before. But as it should be. Lucas learned that even the greatest pains hide new beginnings. And Emma, the truth has a cruel way of coming back. Always. The days following the outcome in court seemed filled with a silence heavier than any storm. Lucas woke up early, but not with the same weight on his chest that he had carried for months, but with a kind of disciplined emptiness, as if his body and mind were learning to live in a new code, without the ghosts that previously occupied every space. He did not celebrate the victory in the process with euphoria, he did not allow himself speeches about justice or revenge, he just continued. The feeling was like having walked through a fire and coming out on the other side without the glow of victory, but with my skin marked by what I learned. His name was now associated with courage, with ethics, but internally he knew that that title came from a place of pain and fracture, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, would restore what was destroyed that night at the party. Emma's words, true as they were, didn't erase the months of doubt, the hole that opened up when he felt deceived by the only person he trusted with his eyes closed. In the company environment, the corridors changed their tone. Colleagues began to avoid direct mention of what had happened, some commented in whispers, others pretended not to know, but the reality is that the internal structure of that organization was irreversibly shaken. The removal of the board did not just mean a change of names and positions, but a rupture in the culture of power that remained protected under layers of silence. Lucas never returned to the building where he worked for so many years, not because he couldn't, but because everything there smelled of the past. He preferred to build his new project elsewhere, far from the echoes of his previous life. His focus became helping people denounce injustices, but more than that, helping them understand that, often, the biggest challenge is not the public outcry, but the intimate silence, the fear of breaking a structure that seems too solid to be faced. Meanwhile, Emma faced the unraveling of her own identity. The woman who was once praised for her elegance and balance now found herself lost. The image he maintained socially fell apart. School mothers began to avoid her at the gates, co-workers stopped responding to her messages, even old friends retreated as if her proximity could contaminate her. Social media went silent. The looks were heavy. And even the words of comfort he received from a few people sounded like measures of pity, not empathy. The guilt, which before was a stone in the chest, now multiplied into fragments that cut inside. And the dilemma she faced was more cruel than other people's judgment. She knew she had made a mistake, but she also knew that she had tried to prevent the greater evil. Who chose what seemed to him, at the time, the least destructive? And yet, it destroyed everything. The doubt that consumed her was whether, even if she had done the opposite, everything would not have ended the same way. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was cowardice. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. In conversations with the therapist, Emma dismantled, piece by piece, the construction she maintained of herself. She talked about how she spent her life trying to please, trying to be perfect in every sphere, how she feared abandonment, how she didn't know how to say no when she felt afraid. He recognized that the betrayal had not just been a physical act, but an emotional capitulation, a plunge into submission that now repulsed him. Not for Adam, but for you. She didn't want him. Never wanted to. He was the symbol of power she never had the courage to face head-on. Giving in was the most perverse way he found to avoid collapsing. But it collapsed. In the same way. And worse. She lost her husband, her children, her dignity. And the most devastating thing was knowing that Lucas might never understand this. Perhaps he would forever carry the simplified version of the story, the woman who betrayed him out of ambition. And even if she shouted the truth from the rooftops, perhaps no one would care anymore. Lucas, on the other hand, despite the silent reconstruction he made of himself, also did not escape his own dilemmas. I was beginning to understand that the line between victim and accomplice, between just and cruel, was thinner than it seemed. There were nights when, even after turning off the lights and seeing her children sleeping peacefully, she felt an anguish that she couldn't name. He wondered if he hadn't been too quick to cut Emma out of his life, if he shouldn't have at least allowed her to explain herself before she collapsed. He thought about whether the forgiveness he had said he was giving was real or just a formality to ease his own conscience. What if it was him in her place? What if he had made a wrong choice for fear of seeing her suffer? The moral dilemma became more acute every day. Not because he wanted to return, but because he understood that there were no longer any guilty or innocent people. There were humans. Injured. Lost. And he was one of them. Helena, who remained present in his life with an almost therapeutic delicacy, did not pressure him. It was like a no-charge shelter. Lucas felt immense relief in being with someone who didn't know his entire past. With her, I didn't need to explain every gesture, every silence. It could just be. And yet, he carried the caution of someone whose heart was torn apart. He didn't make any promises. He didn't let himself be carried away by impulses. I went slowly. But little by little, he allowed himself to smile more often, plan short weekends, share childhood stories. And when he held her hand, he no longer thought about Emma. I thought about possibilities. I thought that maybe I deserved to start over without carrying pain as a badge. Emma, in turn, also began writing a new narrative. Away from the eyes. Away from judgments. He started a distance learning specialization course, resumed reading books he always loved, and began drawing in old notebooks again. I no longer had a solid career, nor invitations to events. But I had time. Time to understand each other, to create real bonds with your children on visiting days, to listen more than talk. And it was during this time, during this emotional exile, that she began to understand what it was to truly love. He realized that, for years, he confused love with obligation, with performance, with external recognition. Now I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Just for you. The final reunion between her and Lucas happened unexpectedly. On an ordinary afternoon, at the bookstore where he had agreed to take his children to choose new books. Emma entered without knowing they were there. Their eyes met and for a second, everything stopped. Her children ran to her with joy, hugging her as if the world hadn't fallen apart months before. And at that moment, Lucas and Emma smiled, not out of longing, not out of nostalgia, but out of understanding. She approached slowly. He asked how he was. He replied that he was fine. And for the first time, it was true. She said she was trying too. He wished he could. And then, the most difficult thing happened. They looked at each other as two adults who know that life is not made up of good guys and bad guys, but of choices that are sometimes made under pressure, with fear, with pain. Emma took her children by the hand, and before leaving, she turned to him and said that, despite everything, she still believed in love. Lucas just nodded. Him too. And it was at that moment, with the two following different paths, but now at peace, that the story began to head towards its true outcome. Justice had been served, the pains had been faced, the ghosts named. But there was still something deeper, quieter, more decisive to happen. Something that would change the course of everything one last time. Because sometimes, even after the whole truth is revealed, fate finds an unexpected way to end the cycle with one last, definitive blow to reality. In the spring of the following year, the city seemed to breathe new air, almost as if nature, in its silent wisdom, knew that certain cycles had ended and others were about to blossom. Lucas walked alongside his children in a wooded park, holding their small hands firmly, but without stiffness. His steps were no longer those of a man fleeing from memories, but those of someone who had found an internal rhythm, silent and solid. The children smiled, ran ahead, came back to him, and in that simple gesture of seeing them free and confident, he felt something like redemption. Not because I had forgiven the past, but because I had decided not to live in it anymore. Helena was waiting for him on a bench further away, leafing through a book with a light expression, and when her eyes met his, there was complicity, but not demand, there was affection, but without the urgency of someone who wants to fill a void. It was a love born of freedom, of listening, of reconstruction, and because of that, he knew, it was a love that could last. Emma, on the other hand, was drinking coffee alone in her new apartment, small, modestly decorated, but full of personality. He had framed on the wall a sentence handwritten by Sophia, his daughter, on a recent visit, "Mommy, I still love you even when you cry." That phrase was his new prayer. The memory of everything he lost still hurt, but in a different way now. The guilt no longer gnawed at her as before, it had turned into responsibility. She used this feeling as fuel to rebuild herself, little by little, without rushing. She had seriously resumed her studies, and had been invited to speak at a small conference on corporate ethics and psychological pressure in the workplace. He was reluctant, but accepted. She knew it was the beginning of something important, not just for herself, but for other women who, like her, once remained silent out of fear. He did not seek public redemption. I just tried not to repeat my mistakes. And if that was enough for someone to find courage, then maybe it would all have, in some torturous way, been worth it. Adam, in turn, was not so lucky. The internal investigation revealed recurring practices of moral harassment and undue favoritism. His name made headlines not just in business columns, but on national news. He lost positions, lost prestige, lost allies. He tried to appeal, he tried to manipulate, he tried to victimize himself, but everything was in vain. The press was merciless, as it always is when rot spills out of the carpet where it has been hidden for too long. He faced criminal proceedings and, although his lawyers managed to delay some decisions, his public image was irreparably ruined. And perhaps, even more cruel, was the silent abandonment of his own family, which discovered, together with the public, who he really was. Lucas, now a partner in a promising startup, saw his name linked to social impact projects, led a diverse team committed to integrity and innovation. His relationship with his children was stronger than ever. He had learned to look at them not just as a reflection of his lost love, but as individuals who needed the best version of him to grow up healthy. With Helena, the relationship evolved organically. There were plans for a long trip with the children during the holidays, and he was already starting to consider a bigger change, perhaps a new house, perhaps even a marriage proposal, but without rush, without pressure, just the lightness of someone who has learned to value time as an ally, not as an enemy. Emma began volunteering at an NGO that welcomed women in situations of psychological violence and manipulation in corporate environments. At first, he felt uncomfortable, as if he had no right to advise anyone, but over time he understood that it was precisely his story that made his listening more sensitive, his speech more empathetic. One day, during a conversation, a young woman came to her at the end of the meeting and said that she had changed her mind about continuing in an abusive relationship because of what she heard from her. Emma cried. For the first time, not out of regret, but because I felt that, finally, something good was coming out of it all. Life wouldn't give her back what she lost, but now she herself could give something back to the world. The lawsuit that Lucas filed against the company set an unprecedented precedent in the sector. Other allegations emerged, former employees found the courage to speak out, and the company needed to reformulate its governance and ethics practices. Internally, it became a case study. Externally, it became a symbol that silence does not protect those who oppress. Lucas was invited to give lectures and interviews, and, despite his aversion to the spotlight, he accepted some strategic appearances, always making it clear that his fight was for justice, not for fame. She knew her story wasn't unique, but if her voice could amplify others, then it would have been worth exposing her own pain. At the end of that summer, Emma and Lucas met by chance in a bookstore, again, months after their last meeting. This time there was no tension, no fear. They sat down for a coffee. They talked about their children, about the books they read, about how life, no matter how much it hurts, always offers a second road. She spoke sincerely about her volunteer work, and he smiled, proudly, without sarcasm. He asked if she was really okay. And she said yes, for the first time in a long time. And he returned the question. Lucas was too. Not because he had erased the past, but because he had transformed the future. When they said goodbye, it was with a calm hug. There was no longer any exposed wound. Just scar. And scars don't hurt, they just remind you. This is how this story ends. A marriage destroyed, a betrayal exposed, a secret revealed. But more than that, a profound transformation in each character that went through this plot. Lucas, who started out as a betrayed man, came out of it as someone even more whole. Emma, who seemed lost in her own choice, was reborn where she least expected it. Adam, symbol of a rotten system, fell with the same arrogance that sustained him. And in the end, no one came out unscathed. But they all came out different. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? What was the strongest part for you? Leave your opinion in the comments, we really want to know. And of course, if you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and follow the next impactful plots we are preparing. And remember, this channel does not, under any circumstances, support any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show, through fiction, how wrong choices can destroy real lives. Until the next story.